I hear you knocking, but you can't come in. I hear you knocking, go back where you been. But this oyster catcher, so named because he cracks open oyster, clam, and mussel shells, ain't going back to where he's been. He's coming in. He'll do it one of two ways: by hammering, or by thrusting his chisel-shaped beak into the partially opened shell of a bivalve and severing the muscle that holds the two halves together. Watch him demonstrate how easily that beak cuts flesh in half. Bet you can't cut a pat of butter off the stick that efficiently. It's an all-purpose tool, also good for prying loose from rocks one of his favorite foods, limpets. Here in the States, we have two oyster catchers, the black, which lives on the west coast, and the American, which lives on the eastern coasts. A dozen different species of oyster catchers are sprinkled all over the globe, except for the polar regions, always on coastal areas, finding the foods they want in intertidal zones, the areas between high tides and low tides. So when the tide is high, the oyster catcher is the opposite of busy. He preens, or dozes, does a lot of that. If a passing boat stirs up the surf, he might flap to a higher perch and then, snooze interrupted, loaf on one leg, steady as a parked car, while other birds fly by or feed. A snowy egret shares the spot, but the egret's a bit more industrious than his rock mate. There's no way you could mistake the American oyster catcher for any other shorebird. He's different in a number of ways. He's chunkier than most of them, with a thick bill good for hammering on shells, and that black hooded head, brown back, and snowy chest distinguish him from the usual plain brown wrappers of other shorebirds. But you know where I'm headed with this, right? Straight for that hot orange beak, of course, complete with matching crazy eyes. And they're not exactly matching. They're yellow with orange rims. So when you take all of his differences into account, picking him out of a crowd is almost as easy as spotting the sun in a cloudless sky. Anyway, as I was saying, it's not until the tide starts receding that the oyster catcher looks for food, poking around in the rocks for limpets, or tapping the sand in hopes of finding mussels or clams. When he finds a bivalve, he's likely to dig a hole in the wet sand and put it there, so the tunnel will hold the shell steady while he gets it open. I mean, think about it. If you had to shove an ice pick into a clam, one-handed, you'd need to hold it upright somehow to brace it. Here, he's found a clam already buried. Really buried. All that clam can do is sit there and hope the bird gives up. But if clams are capable of terror, then this one must be shivering enough to shake the shell as the sand loosens around it and the oyster catcher pulls it out triumphantly. Then the bird takes it to the water to wash it off as he opens it because he prefers his meat unbreaded. You can see that he isn't hammering. He's shoved it into wet sand so he can wedge his bill into it, sever the muscle, and pull out a prize.